Ghetto trash like you shouldn't even have licenses." Officer Leonard Beaumont's words cut through the afternoon air as he leaned against Tamara Elkins's car window, his short-sleeved uniform crisp under the bright suburban sun. The elderly woman sat perfectly still in her blue jacket, hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel as neighbors began gathering on their porches. "You people always got excuses, don't you?" He stepped back, hand resting on his belt, savoring the power as Tamara's eyes filled with quiet dignity and pain. Behind the pristine white house she'd been visiting, footsteps approached the front door, heavy, measured, and belonging to someone who had no idea his mother was being called ghetto trash in his own driveway. "Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background." The traffic stop began innocuously enough. Tamara Elkins had been driving through one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, Maple Heights, when she saw the flashing blue lights of the police cruiser in her rearview mirror. She pulled over right away. It wasn't guilt that made her heart race, but the old fear that crept into her chest around cops. Tamara was 72, and she knew enough of the world to understand that exchanges like these could take a turn pretty quickly, especially for someone like her in a neighborhood like this. The officer came to her car with a swagger that screamed someone drunk on his own authority. Before he even reached her window, his pale face was set in a sneer, the cold blue eyes scanning the interior of her car as if looking for something illegal. "Lady, do you know why I pull you over?" The man's tone was sharp and accusatory without the professional courtesy usually required for such things. Tamara completely lowered her window, placing her hands in her lap, like someone that has learned to swallow pride as a necessity for survival a long time ago. "Oh no, sir. I don't think I was going fast." Belanger had a gentle yet audible voice with a clear diction, showing that his authority as a school librarian had been built through at least 30 years of work. Officer Beaumont's laugh carried a harshness, unkind tones. "Rapidly? I don't think that stop sign was there for your amusement, lady." They waved their hand vaguely back behind them, although Tamara was pretty sure she had stopped at every stop. His eyes narrowed as he took in more of her dark skin and careful posture, how she didn't quite look like somebody who belonged here, he thought as he surveyed the rest of her. "What brings you to Maple Heights anyway? Are you seeing someone? Or are you just driving around looking at houses you can't afford?" Tamara felt as if the question had struck her with physical force. She had faced prejudice before, but hurting and surprising her with its casualness remained a constant. "I am going to see my son," she said unemotionally. A throbbing pain spread through her chest. "He stays on 12047 Elmwood Drive." Officer Beaumont made a derisive sound. "I am sure you are. I assume he's some kind of hotshot? You escaped the hood, and now you want to see how the other half lives?" His voice raised in volume and aggression, as if he were performing for an invisible audience. "I have witnessed that, lady. You all cruise through neighborhoods like this, scouting for places to hit easy." Mrs. Dorothy Chen had heard the officer shout from across the street and stepped towards the porch. A 50-something woman wearing a red blouse and dark slacks, who looked small, began the complaint, and an expression of concern started playing on her face. The other neighbors began to show themselves on porches and in doorways, interrupted by the fuss. Conscious of their gazes, Tamara felt that she had done something wrong, for they were always looking down at her. "I'm just here to visit my son, officer. I have ID if you wish to see it." As slow as she could, she reached toward her purse, hoping that she would not make any sudden moves. "Stay put," Officer Beaumont barked, hand dropping to his gun. The gentle motion by the woman led to a reaction from the man that was so disproportionate that several neighbors stepped forward. "This traffic stop has a problem. Do not touch anything unless I tell you to touch it." Put your hands up where I can see them." Tamara's heart raced in her chest as she put her hands onto the steering wheel. There was an immediate fear that was real. She had watched the news too many times to see those tragic stories of traffic stops on victims. "I apologize, officer. All I wanted was your license and registration. Or maybe if you people learned to follow simple instructions, we wouldn't have these problems." Officer Beaumont's voice rang out clear and loud on the sleepy suburban street. Tamara noticed several neighbors pulling out their phones. His words increasingly became harsh, as if it made him more angry to garner her calm compliance. "What's your son's name, may I ask? This successful son who lives supposedly in a neighborhood like this." Tamara lifted her chin a trifle. "Marcus Elkins." Her tone held a hint of pride despite her fear. "He is a major in the U.S. Army." Officer Beaumont's laughter was genuinely amused now, as if she had told him the most ridiculous lie he'd ever heard. "A major? In the Army?" He shook his head, grinning at his own disbelief. "Lady, you're really going all out with this story. What's next? You're going to tell me he's some kind of war hero?" The mockery in his voice was like acid on Tamara's dignity. She thought of her son's sacrifice, his multiple deployments, the nights she had lain awake worrying about his safety while he served his country overseas, the same country this officer was supposed to serve and protect. "He is," she said quietly. "He's served 3 tours overseas." 3 tours? Officer Beaumont slapped his knee in exaggerated delight. "This just keeps getting better. So your son, the Army Major war hero, lives in a $1 million house in Maple Heights, but you're driving around in this beat-up old car?" He gestured dismissively at her modest sedan, a reliable vehicle she had maintained meticulously for years. "Come on, lady. If you're going to lie, at least make it believable." Mrs. Dorothy Chen had moved closer, her phone now openly recording the interaction. Other neighbors were doing the same, their faces showing a mixture of concern and growing anger at what they were witnessing. The suburban street, usually quiet at this time of day, was becoming an amphitheater for this display of casual racism and abuse of power. Tamara assured the officer that she was not lying, becoming increasingly bolder. "Everything that you have heard is true, nothing but the truth." Officer Beaumont bent to her window again, his face twisted with contempt. "You simply don't belong in a neighborhood like this, you ghetto trash. The reality is that you are likely just here to check out the houses to rob or sell drugs to the children of these fine families. I know full well what you people all do. Every single word aimed to injure and insult her, to rob her of her humanity, to turn her into a caricature that he could dismiss and abuse." Unyielding, Tamara prevented herself from weeping despite feeling tearful, despite facing and overcoming so much, and raising such a good son. She wouldn't let the hatred of this man break her. "I want to see some identification," Officer Beaumont demanded, his tone now openly hostile. "And I want to know exactly what you're really doing in this neighborhood. Because I'm not buying this fairy tale about your son, the Army hero, for 1 second." Inside the house at 1247 Elmwood Drive, Major Marcus Elkins was reviewing some paperwork when he heard the commotion outside. He had returned home just an hour earlier from a military ceremony, and he was still wearing his dress blue uniform, the chest decorated with ribbons that told the story of his distinguished service. He had been expecting his mother's visit, looking forward to showing her around his new home and spending some quality time together. The raised voice outside caught his attention first. Then he heard words that made his blood run cold. The voice was harsh, authoritative, speaking in a tone that no one should use when addressing his mother. He moved toward the front window, his military bearing evident in every step. Officer Beaumont was still berating Tamara when he noticed more neighbors gathering. The attention seemed to embolden rather than restrain him. "You know what I think? I think you're trespassing. I think you're in this neighborhood for no good reason. and I think you're about to take a little ride downtown with me." A bodily feeling of threat had hung in the air. For a tiny moment, Tamara closed her eyes and drew on strength she had built over the 7 decades of fighting. When she opened her eyes again, her gaze was clear and voice steady. "I am not guilty of any crime. I was turning a visit to my son. I'll gladly prove that if only you'll let me show you my identification." "You're going to show me your hands and cuffs if you don't start showing some respect," Officer Beaumont snarled. "I'm really tired of your attitude, lady. I'm really fed up with you folks thinking you can just drive around wherever like it's the norm." Inside the home, there was enough for Major Marcus Elkins to hear. His mother yelled through a strained but dignified voice. The officer's words were thick with venom and hatred, making his jaw clench with muted rage. He walked to the front door and reached for the doorknob. The afternoon sun shone over Maple Heights, and as the owner of the Copperwoods made his way out, some things were about to change forever. Amidst the suburban tranquility, an elderly black woman sat in her car, dignified in the face of humiliation, as a racist cop was all set to arrest her for the crime of visiting her son. The neighbors watched and recorded, believing that something happening was worthy of recording and judgment. And behind the front door of 12247 Elmwood Drive, a decorated war hero prepared to step outside and discover that sometimes the battles that matter most are fought not overseas, but right in your own driveway, defending the people you love most from the very system you've sworn to serve. The door handle turned, and everything was about to change. The sound of heavy footsteps on hardwood flooring echoed from within the house, each step deliberate and measured. Officer Leonard Beaumont was mid-sentence, his fingers still jabbing accusingly toward Tamara Elkins, when the front door of the pristine colonial home swung open with quiet authority. Major Marcus Elkins emerged into the bright afternoon sunlight, and the entire atmosphere of the confrontation shifted like a seismic plate moving beneath everyone's feet. He stood 6 feet 2 inches of pure military bearing, his broad shoulders filling out a pristine army dress blue uniform that spoke of ceremony and honor. The dark blue jacket was adorned with a constellation of ribbons and medals across his chest, each one telling a story of service, sacrifice, and dedication to his country. Silver paratrooper wings gleamed above the colorful array of commendations, while combat patches and service stripes decorated his sleeves. His muscular frame, honed by years of military discipline, commanded immediate respect and attention. Officer Leonard Beaumont's aggressive posture crumbled like a house of cards in a windstorm. His pointing finger slowly lowered as his eyes swept across the impressive display of military honors adorning Marcus's chest. The loud, domineering voice that had been hurling insults and threats just moments before caught in his throat. His face, which had been flushed red with racist fury, now began draining of color as the reality of the situation dawned on him. Marcus's dark eyes surveyed the scene with the calm assessment of a battlefield commander evaluating a tactical situation. His gaze moved from his mother sitting in the driver's seat of her sedan, her hands still gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles, to the uniformed officer whose entire demeanor had transformed from predator to prey in the span of seconds. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, his voice carrying the natural authority of someone accustomed to commanding soldiers in life and death situations. The words were polite, professional, but underneath lay an unmistakable steel that made Officer Beaumont instinctively take a step backward. "I'm Major Marcus Elkins. Is there some kind of problem here?" Officer Beaumont's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The swagger and confidence that had powered his racist tirade evaporated completely as he found himself face to face with a decorated war hero whose very presence commanded respect. His hand unconsciously moved toward his radio, a nervous gesture that spoke to his sudden uncertainty about how to handle this dramatically changed situation. There was your Beaumont stammered, his voice now lacking any of the aggressive authority he had wielded just moments before. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain some measure of control over the situation. "Sir, this woman was driving suspiciously through the neighborhood. I was conducting a routine traffic stop for failure to come to a complete stop at the intersection." Marcus's expression remained perfectly neutral, but something flickered in his dark eyes that made the officer shift uncomfortably. "This woman," Marcus repeated slowly, each word measured and deliberate, "is my mother, Mrs. Tamara Elkins. She's visiting me at my home." He gestured toward the house behind him with one hand, while the other rested calmly at his side. "This is my residence, officer." "Beaumont," the policeman replied automatically, his training kicking in despite his obvious discomfort. "Officer Leonard Beaumont, badge number 4471. The admission seemed to hang in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Marcus nodded slowly, committing the information to memory with the same precision he had once used to memorize tactical maps and enemy positions. His military bearing remained impeccable, shoulders square, spine straight, every inch the professional soldier even as he dealt with this civilian crisis. "Officer Beaumont," Marcus acknowledged, his tone remaining professionally courteous while somehow conveying volumes about his assessment of the man before him. "Perhaps you could explain to me exactly what suspicious behavior you observed that warranted stopping my mother as she drove to visit me." Around the neighborhood, more residents had emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion that had initially erupted from Officer Beaumont's loud, aggressive confrontation with Tamara. Mrs. Dorothy Chen, a petite Asian woman wearing a red cardigan over dark slacks, had positioned herself strategically on her front porch, where she had a clear view of the entire scene. Her smartphone was now recording everything, the device held steady in her experienced hands as she documented what was clearly becoming a significant incident. Other neighbors clustered on porches and lawns, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and concern. The presence of the imposing military officer had transformed what might have been dismissed as a routine police matter into something far more significant. Children playing in yards had been quietly called inside by parents who sensed the gravity of the situation unfolding on their peaceful street. Officer Beaumont's eyes darted nervously around the growing audience, beads of perspiration beginning to form on his forehead despite the comfortable afternoon temperature. He was clearly struggling to reconcile his previous aggressive stance with the new reality confronting him. The woman he had been verbally abusing, calling ghetto trash and threatening with arrest, was not some random person he could intimidate with impunity. She was the mother of a decorated army major whose chest full of ribbons and medals spoke eloquently of service above and beyond the call of duty. The stop was routine, Beaumont repeated weakly, his previous conviction dissolving like sugar in rain. Standard traffic enforcement? Marcus took a single step forward, not aggressive or threatening, but with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced down enemies in foreign lands and was certainly not intimidated by a racist small-town police officer. "I see. And is it standard procedure to raise your voice and use derogatory language during routine traffic stops, Officer Beaumont?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Beaumont's face flushed red again, though this time from embarrassment rather than anger. He had no way of knowing exactly what Marcus had heard from inside the house, but the major's tone suggested he had heard enough to understand the true nature of what had transpired. From her position behind the steering wheel, Tamara looked up at her son with a mixture of overwhelming relief and deep pride. The fear and humiliation that had gripped her during Officer Beaumont's racist attack began to ebb away, replaced by the security that came from knowing she was no longer alone and defenseless. Her son, her decorated war hero son, had emerged like an avenging angel to stand between her and the hatred that had been directed at her. The power dynamic that had so favored Officer Beaumont just minutes earlier had completely reversed. where once he had held all the authority, wielding his badge and uniform like weapons against a lone elderly woman. He now found himself facing a superior adversary in every meaningful way. Marcus's calm professionalism highlighted Beaumont's earlier unprofessional behavior, while his obvious military achievements made the officer's attempts at intimidation seem petty and pathetic. "Listen, Major," Beaumont began, attempting to inject some authority back into his voice. "I don't know what you think you heard, but I was just doing my job. Your mother was driving erratically, and when I attempted to question her about her presence in this neighborhood, she became uncooperative." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly at this obvious fabrication, and he turned his attention briefly to his mother. "Mom, are you all right?" Tamara nodded, finding her voice again now that her son was there to support her. "I'm fine, Marcus. I was just trying to explain to the officer that I was coming to visit you when he started." She trailed off, unable to repeat the hateful words that had been directed at her. "When he started what, Mom?" Marcus asked gently, though his eyes remained fixed on Officer Beaumont with unwavering intensity. Mrs. Dorothy Chen stepped forward from her porch, her phone still recording. "Officer, I heard exactly what you said to this lady. I heard you call her ghetto trash and question whether she belonged in this neighborhood. That wasn't any routine traffic stop." Other neighbors nodded in agreement, their faces showing disapproval of what they had witnessed. The community that Officer Beaumont had thought would automatically support his authority was instead rallying behind the dignified elderly woman and her impressive military son. Officer Beaumont's situation continued to deteriorate as he realized that his actions had been observed and would be documented. The racist language he had used so freely, thinking he was dealing with a powerless victim, was now going to follow him like a shadow. His attempts to reframe the incident as routine police work were crumbling under the weight of multiple witness accounts and video evidence. Marcus surveyed the scene with the tactical awareness that had served him well in combat zones around the world. He could see that Officer Beaumont was beginning to panic, and he knew that cornered animals could be dangerous. His priority was ensuring his mother's safety and dignity while methodically building a case that would ensure this racist officer faced appropriate consequences for his actions. "Officer Beaumont," Marcus said finally, his voice carrying the quiet authority of command, "I think we need to have a very serious conversation about what happened here today." The morning sun cast sharp shadows across the suburban street as Officer Leonard Beaumont realized the gravity of his situation. Standing before him in full military dress blues was a decorated army officer, ribbons gleaming on his chest, whose mother he had just verbally assaulted with racial slurs. The weight of his badge suddenly felt crushing against his uniform shirt as sweat began to form beneath his short-sleeved police shirt, despite the cool morning air. "Look, there seems to be some kind of misunderstanding here," Officer Leonard Beaumont said, his voice noticeably higher than the commanding tone he had used moments before with Tamara Elkins. He forced what he hoped was a professional smile, but it came across as nervous and insincere. "I was just conducting routine traffic enforcement in this neighborhood. Your mother here was driving erratically, and I had to pull her over for everyone's safety." Major Marcus Elkins stood perfectly still, his military bearing evident in every line of his posture. His green dress shirt was immaculate beneath his blue military jacket, and his eyes never left Officer Leonard Beaumont's face. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had commanded soldiers in combat zones. "Officer, I was standing at my front window when you approached my mother's vehicle. I heard every word you said to her." Major Marcus Elkins paused, letting the weight of his statement settle. "Would you mind repeating for me exactly what you called my mother? The specific words you used to describe her?" Officer Leonard Beaumont's hand moved instinctively toward his radio, a nervous gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the growing crowd of neighbors. Mrs. Dorothy Chen stood on her front porch in her red blouse and dark pants, her phone still recording everything. 2 other neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion that had started with Officer Leonard Beaumont's aggressive shouting. "I don't recall using any inappropriate language," Officer Leonard Beaumont said, but his voice lacked conviction. Sometimes in high-stress situations, civilians might misinterpret standard police procedures and terminology. From her position still seated in the driver's seat, Tamara Elkins looked up at her son with a mixture of pride and lingering humiliation. Her blue jacket was slightly wrinkled from the stress of the encounter, but her dignity remained intact. She had raised this man to be strong, and now he was using that strength to protect her. "Oh, we all heard you loud and clear," Mrs. Dorothy Chen called out from her porch, her voice carrying clearly across the quiet street. "You called her ghetto trash and asked what you people were doing in this neighborhood. I've got it all on video if anyone needs their memory refreshed." Another neighbor, an elderly man in a blue jacket who had been tending his garden, nodded in agreement. "Heard every word from my yard. Shameful language from someone who's supposed to serve and protect." Officer Leonard Beaumont's face flushed red as he realized his attempts at denial were crumbling around him. The presence of witnesses, especially ones recording the interaction, made his situation exponentially worse. He had dealt with complaints before, but never with this level of documentation, and never involving the family member of someone with obvious military rank and bearing. "Now listen here," Officer Leonard Beaumont said, trying to reassert his authority. "I'm the police officer here, and I don't appreciate being questioned about my professional conduct by civilians. I was doing my job, and if people want to twist my words around, that's their problem." Major Marcus Elkins took a single step forward, not aggressive, but unmistakably commanding. His military decorations caught the sunlight, and several neighbors could see combat ribbons among his awards. When he spoke, his voice remained calm, but carried an edge that made Officer Leonard Beaumont instinctively take a step back. "Officer, I'm going to need your badge number and the contact information for your immediate supervisor. I'll also need the name of your department's Internal Affairs Division." Major Marcus Elkins pulled out his phone with practiced efficiency. "As a major in the United States Army and a military police officer, I'm well versed in both civilian and military law enforcement procedures. What I witnessed here today was not professional conduct by any standard." The mention of military police training seemed to deflate Officer Leonard Beaumont further. He had assumed he was dealing with civilians who didn't understand police procedures or know their rights. Instead, he found himself facing someone who likely knew police protocols better than he did. "You can't threaten a police officer," Officer Leonard Beaumont said, but even he seemed to know how weak it sounded. "I have the authority here, and I was conducting a legitimate traffic stop. I'm not threatening anyone," Major Marcus Elkins replied, his tone remaining professional. "I'm following proper procedures for filing a complaint about misconduct, just as you claim to have been following traffic enforcement procedures, though I think we both know that calling my mother ghetto trash isn't covered in any police manual." Mrs. Dorothy Chen stepped down from her porch, still recording. "Officer, I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, and I've never seen you patrol this area before today. But I have seen Mrs. Elkins visiting her son dozens of times. She belongs here more than you do." Other neighbors murmured their agreement, and Officer Leonard Beaumont could feel the situation slipping completely out of his control. What had started as what he thought would be an easy harassment of someone he assumed had no power or connections had turned into a career-threatening nightmare. "Look, maybe we can work this out," Officer Leonard Beaumont said, his voice now pleading rather than commanding. "If there was a miscommunication or if anyone felt disrespected, that wasn't my intention. Sometimes police work requires firm language, and maybe it came across wrong." Major Marcus Elkins shook his head slowly. "Officer, there was no miscommunication. You used racial slurs against my mother. You questioned her right to be in this neighborhood based solely on her race. You threatened to arrest her for suspicious behavior, when her only crime was visiting her son's home. These aren't misunderstandings. They're violations of her civil rights and your oath as a law enforcement officer. The military officer's knowledge of legal terminology clearly rattled Officer Leonard Beaumont even further. He was used to citizens who didn't know their rights or how to articulate violations of those rights. Major Marcus Elkins spoke with the precision of someone who had studied law and applied it in high-stakes situations. "I want to see your driver's license and military ID," Officer Leonard Beaumont said desperately, trying to regain some control over the situation. "And I need verification of your claims about being a major." Major Marcus Elkins reached into his pocket and produced both documents without hesitation. His military ID clearly showed his rank and current status, while his driver's license confirmed his address at the house behind them. Officer Leonard Beaumont examined both documents, knowing he was looking for problems he wouldn't find. "Everything appears to be in order," Officer Leonard Beaumont muttered, handing the documents back. He was running out of options and knew that every additional word he spoke was likely making his situation worse. "Mom, let's get you out of the car," Major Marcus Elkins said, moving to open the driver's side door. His voice was gentle when he spoke to his mother, a sharp contrast to the firm authority he had used with the officer. "You don't need to sit in there anymore." Tamara Elkins accepted her son's offered hand and stood with dignity intact despite the ordeal she had endured. Her blue jacket hung properly now as she smoothed it down, and she looked Officer Leonard Beaumont directly in the eyes for the first time during the encounter. "Officer, I am a 72-year-old woman who has never been arrested, never been in trouble with the law, and who raised a son who has served his country with honor in multiple combat deployments," Tamara Elkins said, her voice steady and clear. "I did not deserve to be spoken to the way you spoke to me, and no one else does either." Major Marcus Elkins placed a protective arm around his mother's shoulders and began walking her toward the house. Over his shoulder, he called back to Officer Leonard Beaumont, "Officer, you'll be hearing from Internal Affairs, the NAACP, and likely the media about today's incident. I suggest you contact your union representative and consider whether law enforcement is really the right career path for someone with your apparent attitudes about minority citizens." As the Elkins family walked away, Officer Leonard Beaumont stood alone beside his patrol car, watching his career prospects disappear with them. The neighbors remained outside, several still recording, all of them witnesses to his downfall. Mrs. Dorothy Chen approached him with her phone still running. "Officer, I hope you realize what you've done here today. You've shown your true colors, and now the whole world is going to see them too." She held up her phone meaningfully. "This video is going to make sure what happened to Mrs. Elkins doesn't happen to anyone else." Officer Leonard Beaumont got back into his patrol car without responding, knowing that anything he said would only make things worse. As he drove away from the neighborhood, he understood that his attempt at intimidating what he thought was a powerless elderly woman had instead destroyed everything he had worked for in his law enforcement career. Behind him, the community was already rallying around the Elkins family, and the documentation of his misconduct was spreading beyond his ability to contain or control. The front door closed with a soft click behind them, shutting out the chaos of flashing police lights and gathering neighbors. Inside the warmth of Major Marcus Elkins' living room, the contrast was stark. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating family photographs that lined the mantel, military commendations in polished frames, and the comfortable furniture that spoke of a home built with care and pride. Tamara Elkins sank into the leather armchair, her blue jacket still buttoned despite the warmth. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her dark slacks, the adrenaline finally catching up with her body. The dignified composure she'd maintained during Officer Leonard Beaumont's verbal assault was beginning to crack, revealing the human being beneath who had been called ghetto trash in broad daylight. Major Marcus Elkins knelt beside his mother's chair, his dress blue uniform crisp and formal, the ribbons and medals catching the afternoon light. His muscular frame, accustomed to bearing the weight of military responsibility, now carried something more personal and urgent. "Mama, look at me," he said, his voice gentle but commanding. "You're safe now. You're in your son's house, and that officer will never speak to you that way again. I promise you that." Tamara Elkins met his eyes, seeing the same determination that had carried him through multiple deployments overseas. "Marcus, baby, I don't want you getting in trouble over this. That man, he had such hate in his voice. I've heard it before, but never so bold, so public. That's exactly why we're not letting this go," Major Marcus Elkins replied, standing and reaching for his phone. "This isn't just about what happened to you today. It's about every black mother, father, and child who might encounter Officer Leonard Beaumont tomorrow." He dialed a number with practiced precision, his military bearing evident in every movement. The phone rang twice before a crisp female voice answered. "Captain Diana Holloway speaking." "Captain, this is Major Marcus Elkins. I need to report an incident involving a civilian police officer and my family." There was a brief pause. Captain Diana Holloway had served with Major Marcus Elkins for over a decade, and she knew him as a man who chose his words carefully. When he said there was an incident, it meant something serious had occurred. "Go ahead, Marcus, what happened?" Major Marcus Elkins recounted the events with military precision, his voice steady and factual. He described Officer Leonard Beaumont's language, his aggressive posture, the racial slurs, and the way he had dismissed Tamara Elkins's explanation with contempt. Captain Diana Holloway's silence grew heavier with each detail. When Major Marcus Elkins finished, her voice carried the sharp edge of command authority. "Marcus, I want you to know that the United States Army stands behind you and your family 100%. What you've described is not just unprofessional conduct, it's a civil rights violation. I'm going to make some calls. We have resources, and we're going to use them." "Thank you, Captain. I knew I could count on the Army family." "Always, Major. Document everything, every word, every witness, every piece of evidence. And Marcus, I'm proud of how you handled yourself out there. Your restraint showed more strength than any confrontation would have." After ending the call, Major Marcus Elkins immediately dialed another number. Detective James Whitfield from Internal Affairs had a reputation for thoroughness and integrity, qualities that had made him the go-to investigator for sensitive cases involving officer misconduct. "Detective Whitfield, this is Major Marcus Elkins. I need to report a civil rights violation involving Officer Leonard Beaumont. Badge number 4729. Detective James Whitfield's voice sharpened with interest. "Major, I'm listening, and I have to tell you, that name has crossed my desk before." "I was hoping you'd say that, Detective, but I was also afraid you would." As Major Marcus Elkins detailed the incident, Detective James Whitfield took extensive notes. When the Major finished, the detective's sigh was audible through the phone. "Major, Officer Leonard Beaumont has 3 previous complaints involving racial bias. 2 were deemed unsubstantiated due to lack of evidence, and 1 resulted in a verbal reprimand. But what you're describing, with witnesses and potential video evidence, that changes everything. What do you need from us?" "Everything. Witness statements, any recordings, documentation of the conversation. I'm opening a formal investigation as of right now. This officer's pattern of behavior ends today." The doorbell chimed, interrupting their conversation. Through the window, Major Marcus Elkins could see Mrs. Dorothy Chen standing on the porch, her phone in her hand, and determination written across her face. "Detective, I have witnesses at my door. Can I call you back with their statements?" "Absolutely. And Major, thank you for serving our country. Now let us serve you." Major Marcus Elkins opened the door to find not just Mrs. Dorothy Chen, but 3 other neighbors from the street. Mrs. Dorothy Chen, wearing a red blouse and dark pants, stepped forward first. "Major Elkins, I have everything recorded. Every word that officer said to your mother. But more than that, I need to tell you about my own experience with Officer Leonard Beaumont." The group settled in the living room, Tamara Elkins listening as her neighbors shared their stories. Mrs. Dorothy Chen spoke first, her voice steady but angry. "Last month, Officer Leonard Beaumont pulled over my teenage son for suspicious behavior. My boy was walking home from basketball practice, carrying his gym bag. That officer made him empty the bag on the sidewalk, called him boy repeatedly, and threatened to arrest him for attitude when my son asked why he was being stopped." Another neighbor, an elderly black man named Robert Thompson wearing a green shirt and blue jacket, nodded grimly. "He stopped me 3 times in 6 months, always for routine checks, always with that same condescending tone, like I was lying about living in my own neighborhood." The third neighbor, a young Latina woman named Sofia Martinez in a red top and jeans, added her voice to the chorus. "He pulled me over for erratic driving when I was rushing my daughter to the emergency room. When I tried to explain, he said maybe I should learn to drive before I learn to breed. I filed a complaint, but nothing happened." Major Marcus Elkins listened to each story, taking detailed notes in a composition book with the same methodical approach he used for military reports. Tamara Elkins watched her son work, seeing the strategic mind that had made him an effective officer, now focused on civilian justice. "Mrs. Chen, you mentioned you recorded the incident. Every word from when he called your mother ghetto trash until you came outside. It's all here on my phone, and I've already backed it up to the cloud. We're going to need copies of everything, but first, I need to make another call." Major Marcus Elkins dialed the office of Attorney Samuel Prescott, a civil rights lawyer whose reputation for taking on police misconduct cases was legendary in the community. The receptionist put him through immediately when he mentioned the nature of his call. "Mr. Prescott, my name is Major Marcus Elkins. A police officer racially profiled and verbally abused my elderly mother during a traffic stop this afternoon. We have video evidence and multiple witnesses." Attorney Samuel Prescott's interest was immediate. "Major, I've been following cases involving racial profiling in your precinct. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning and bring everything you have?" "Actually, Mr. Prescott, we'd like to handle this right. What should we be documenting now?" "Everything. Witness statements, video evidence, any security footage from the neighborhood, and detailed written accounts from everyone involved. This sounds like a clear case of civil rights violation, and I'd be honored to represent your family pro bono." As Major Marcus Elkins arranged the meeting, Mrs. Dorothy Chen was already coordinating with the other neighbors. "The Hendersons have security cameras that face the street. I'll ask them to save the footage." And Mrs. Wilson across the street, she was gardening and saw the whole thing. The methodical documentation continued for the next 2 hours. Major Marcus Elkins used his military training to organize evidence, creating a timeline of events, a list of witnesses, and a detailed account of Officer Leonard Beaumont's words and actions. Each neighbor provided a written statement, their individual experiences painting a picture of systematic harassment. Tamara Elkins watched the process unfold around her, feeling both gratitude and apprehension. "Marcus, are you sure we should push this so hard? That officer, he has power. He could make things difficult." Major Marcus Elkins stopped writing and looked at his mother directly. "Mama, I've served 3 tours overseas fighting for the principles this country stands for. I didn't risk my life defending freedom abroad just to watch a racist officer terrorize my own mother at home. We have evidence, we have witnesses, we have legal support, and we have the backing of the United States Army." He gestured to the neighbors still gathered in his living room, Mrs. Dorothy Chen comparing her phone recording with a timeline they were building. "More than that, we have this community. These people didn't have to come forward. They chose to because they know that what happened to you was wrong, and they're tired of Officer Leonard Beaumont using his badge to spread hate. Tamara Elkins nodded slowly, feeling something shift inside her chest. The fear and humiliation from the traffic stop were still present, but they were being joined by something else. Hope, determination, the knowledge that her son's training and community support had created an opportunity for real justice. What happens next? Tomorrow we meet with attorney Samuel Prescott. Detective James Whitfield will complete his investigation, and Officer Leonard Beaumont will learn that badge or no badge, there are consequences for treating people like they're less than human. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the living room windows, the last of the neighbors prepared to leave. Mrs. Dorothy Chen squeezed Tamara Elkins' hand before departing. Mrs. Elkins, what that officer did to you was wrong, but watching your son handle this, seeing how he's building this case, I think Officer Leonard Beaumont picked the wrong family to mess with. After everyone left, Major Marcus Elkins sat beside his mother, both of them looking at the organized stacks of evidence they'd compiled. Witness statements, contact information, the timeline of events, and Mrs. Dorothy Chen's damning recording. Mama, are you ready for this fight? Tamara Elkins straightened her blue jacket and met her son's eyes. Baby, I raised a warrior. I guess it's time to show him where he got it from. The investigation had begun, and Officer Leonard Beaumont's world was about to change forever. The fluorescent lights in Detective James Whitfield's office cast a harsh glow over the manila folders spread across his desk like fallen dominoes. Each folder represented a complaint against Officer Leonard Beaumont, and as Detective James Whitfield opened the fifth file that morning, the pattern became undeniably clear. His orange polo shirt and blue jacket felt constraining as tension built in his shoulders, the weight of institutional failure pressing down on him with each document he reviewed. The first complaint, dated back 3 years, filed by Darius Washington, a 28-year-old black father who had been pulled over while driving his daughter to school. According to the report, Officer Leonard Beaumont had called him boy repeatedly and suggested he was probably dealing drugs to afford his car. The complaint had been marked unsubstantiated after a cursory investigation lasting less than a week. Detective James Whitfield's fingers drummed against his desk as he read the next file. Maria and Carlos Hernandez had filed a complaint 18 months ago after Officer Leonard Beaumont had detained their entire family during a traffic stop, demanding to see their citizenship papers despite their Virginia driver's licenses. The officer had allegedly told them to go back where you came from, while their 8-year-old son watched from the back seat. This complaint had been dismissed as he said, she said, with no further action taken. File after file revealed the same disturbing pattern, complaints that should have triggered serious investigations, instead gathering dust in filing cabinets. Detective James Whitfield felt his stomach turn as he realized how many warning signs had been ignored, how many opportunities for intervention had been wasted. His desk phone rang, interrupting his dark thoughts. Attorney Samuel Prescott's voice came through clear and determined. Detective Whitfield, I need to discuss the Beaumont investigation with you. Major Elkins and I have been reviewing the preliminary findings, and we believe there are other victims who need to be contacted. I'm looking at their files right now, Detective James Whitfield replied, his voice heavy with the weight of what he was discovering. Samuel, this goes deeper than we initially thought. Beaumont has been a walking civil rights violation for years, and somehow he kept slipping through the cracks. Can you meet us at Major Elkins' house this afternoon? We need to coordinate our approach with these other victims. Some of them might be afraid to come forward without proper support. Detective James Whitfield glanced at the stack of files, then at his watch. The natural skylight streaming through his office window illuminated the damning evidence spread before him. I'll be there at 3. And Samuel, bring a recorder. What I've found here is going to change everything." Meanwhile, across town in the pristine conference room of the military base, Captain Diana Holloway sat with her back straight, her muscular frame filling out her crisp green military top as she addressed a room full of officers and non-commissioned personnel. The overhead fluorescent lighting cast sharp shadows across the faces of men and women who had served alongside Major Marcus Elkins in various capacities over the years. What happened to Major Elkins' mother is not just an attack on one family, Captain Diana Holloway stated, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat zones. It's an attack on everything we swore to defend when we put on this uniform. Marcus Elkins has bled for this country, has sacrificed years of his life in service to the ideals we hold dear, and his mother was called ghetto trash by someone who took an oath to serve and protect. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, a decorated veteran with 2 Purple Hearts, leaned forward in his chair. "Ma'am, what can we do? How do we support Marcus and his family through this?" Captain Diana Holloway had anticipated this question. "First, we document Major Elkins' character and service record. Every commendation, every mission, every time he went above and beyond. Second, we make it clear to the civilian authorities that the military community stands behind our own. And third, we ensure that everyone understands this kind of treatment of military families will not be tolerated." The room buzzed with quiet conversation as officers shared their own experiences with Major Marcus Elkins. Stories of his leadership under fire, his dedication to his soldiers, his unwavering integrity in the face of adversity. Each story would become ammunition in the battle for justice that was rapidly building momentum. Back at Major Marcus Elkins' house, the afternoon sun streamed through the living room windows as Tamara Elkins sat in her blue jacket, her hands folded in her lap, while her son paced near the window. His green military top and dark slacks were immaculate as always, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when he thought she wasn't looking. The doorbell rang, and Major Marcus Elkins opened it to find Detective James Whitfield and Attorney Samuel Prescott, both carrying briefcases that seemed to promise either salvation or further heartache. "Detective Whitfield," Major Marcus Elkins said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." Detective James Whitfield's handshake was firm, his eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Major Elkins, what I have to share with you today is going to be difficult to hear, but it's also going to be crucial for building a case that ensures this never happens again." They settled in the living room. Attorney Samuel Prescott, in his sharp blue suit, opening his briefcase, while Detective James Whitfield spread the complaint files across the coffee table. Tamara Elkins leaned forward, her eyes widening as she saw the sheer volume of documentation. "Mrs. Elkins," Detective James Whitfield began gently, "you were not Officer Beaumont's first victim. Not by a long shot." He opened the first file, showing her the photograph of Darius Washington and his 5-year-old daughter. 3 years ago, Mr. Washington was driving his daughter to her first day of kindergarten when Beaumont pulled him over for suspicious behavior. The suspicious behavior was driving a nice car while black. Tamara Elkins' hand went to her throat as Detective James Whitfield continued. "Beaumont called him boy in front of his daughter, suggested he was probably a drug dealer, made him wait on the side of the road for 45 minutes while he ran unnecessary checks. The little girl was crying by the time it was over." Major Marcus Elkins' hands clenched into fists at his sides. "What happened to the complaint?" "Dismissed," Attorney Samuel Prescott said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Marked as unsubstantiated because there were no witnesses and no recording." Detective James Whitfield opened another file. "The Hernandez family. Carlos works as an engineer. Maria teaches elementary school, both born in Virginia. Beaumont pulled them over during a family trip to the beach, demanded to see citizenship papers, told their 8-year-old son that his family didn't belong in America." Tamara Elkins felt tears welling in her eyes, not just for herself but for all these families who had suffered in silence, whose complaints had been filed away and forgotten. "How many?" Major Marcus Elkins asked, his voice barely controlled. 11 documented complaints over 3 years, Detective James Whitfield replied. "And those are just the ones who were brave enough to come forward officially. There are probably dozens more who never reported anything." Attorney Samuel Prescott leaned forward, his expression determined. "We need to contact these families. Some of them might be willing to add their voices to this case to ensure that Beaumont faces consequences not just for what he did to Mrs. Elkins, but for his entire pattern of racist behavior." The weight of systematic injustice settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Tamara Elkins realized that her humiliation was part of something much larger, much more insidious than one bad encounter with one bad cop. At that moment, Major Marcus Elkins' phone buzzed with a text message from Captain Diana Holloway. "Military community meeting complete. 37 officers ready to provide character testimony. Full support authorized." He read the message aloud, and for the first time since the investigation began, Tamara Elkins felt a spark of hope. Her son's military family was rallying around them, providing the kind of institutional support that these other families had never received. Detective James Whitfield's phone rang, and he answered it with a curt, "Whitfield here." His expression grew increasingly grim as he listened to the voice on the other end. "That was Chief Gallagher," he said after hanging up. "Officer Beaumont has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. The chief is feeling pressure from city council members who are starting to ask questions about the department's complaint handling procedures." Attorney Samuel Prescott smiled grimly. "Good. Pressure is exactly what we need. For too long, officers like Beaumont have operated with impunity because they knew the system would protect them." "There's more," Detective James Whitfield continued. "Sergeant Kowalski, Beaumont's partner, has requested a meeting with Internal Affairs. Apparently, he has some things he wants to share about his colleagues' behavior and comments." Major Marcus Elkins raised an eyebrow. His own partner is turning on him? "It happens more often than you might think," Detective James Whitfield explained. "Good cops get tired of being associated with bad cops, especially when the spotlight gets bright enough. Kowalski probably saw the writing on the wall and decided to get ahead of the story." As if summoned by their conversation, Detective James Whitfield's phone rang again. This time, it was Sergeant David Kowalski himself, requesting an immediate meeting. An hour later, they sat in a private conference room at the police station, the overhead fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across Sergeant David Kowalski's weathered face. His short-sleeved uniform shirt was crisp and pressed, but his hands shook slightly as he opened a small notebook. "I should have spoken up sooner," Sergeant David Kowalski began, his voice heavy with regret. "I should have done something years ago, but I was a coward. I was afraid of being labeled a snitch, afraid of making waves in the department." Attorney Samuel Prescott leaned forward. "Sergeant Kowalski, anything you share with us today will be documented and may be used in legal proceedings. Do you understand that?" "I understand," Sergeant David Kowalski replied. "And I'm ready to face whatever consequences come from telling the truth." He opened his notebook, revealing pages of dates, times, and detailed notes. "I started writing things down about 2 years ago after Beaumont made some particularly vile comments about a black teenager we had pulled over for a broken taillight. The kid was polite, cooperative, had no record, but Beaumont kept calling him future inmate and another statistic waiting to happen." Major Marcus Elkins felt his jaw tighten as Sergeant David Kowalski continued reading from his notes, detailing instance after instance of racist comments, inappropriate behavior, and abuse of authority. Each entry painted a picture of an officer who saw his badge not as a symbol of service, but as a license to terrorize minority communities. "The day he stopped your mother," Sergeant David Kowalski said, looking directly at Major Marcus Elkins. "I heard him on the radio before I arrived. He was laughing, telling dispatch he had found some suspicious urban wildlife in the suburbs. Those were his exact words. Tamara Elkins closed her eyes, the casual cruelty of the phrase hitting her like a physical blow. To Officer Leonard Beaumont, she hadn't been a person, hadn't been someone's mother or grandmother. She had been prey, something to be hunted and humiliated for his entertainment. Detective James Whitfield made careful notes as Sergeant David Kowalski continued his testimony, each revelation adding another layer to the case they were building. The pattern was undeniable, systematic, and utterly damning. Sergeant Kowalski, Attorney Samuel Prescott asked, "In your professional opinion, was Officer Beaumont's behavior toward Mrs. Elkins consistent with his typical interactions with minority community members?" "Absolutely," Sergeant David Kowalski replied without hesitation. "If anything, he showed restraint because we were in that neighborhood. He said much worse things to people in areas where he thought no one important was watching." As the meeting concluded and they prepared to leave, Detective James Whitfield felt the weight of institutional accountability finally beginning to shift in favor of justice. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses credible, and the pattern undeniable. But more than that, he realized they had something that the previous complaint investigations had lacked: a victim with the resources, connections, and determination to see the fight through to the end. Major Marcus Elkins wasn't going to let his mother's humiliation be filed away and forgotten like all the others. The foundation was being laid for a reckoning that would extend far beyond one racist cop, reaching into the very structures that had allowed him to operate with impunity for so long. Change was coming, and it would be thorough, systematic, and long overdue. The notification sound on Mrs. Dorothy Chen's phone had been chiming incessantly for the past hour. What started as a simple upload of Officer Leonard Beaumont's racist tirade to her neighborhood Facebook group had exploded beyond anything she could have imagined. The video showing the white officer calling Tamara Elkins ghetto trash while she sat quietly in her car had been shared thousands of times in just 6 hours. "Marcus, you need to see this," Mrs. Chen called out as she hurried up the walkway to the Elkins home, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. Major Marcus Elkins opened the door, still wearing his green military t-shirt and blue jeans from their morning strategy session with Attorney Samuel Prescott. "What's happening, Mrs. Chen?" he asked, noting the mixture of excitement and concern on her face. "The video has gone viral. National news outlets are calling me. Someone shared it on Twitter, and it's been retweeted over 50,000 times. People are furious about how that officer treated your mother." Tamara Elkins emerged from the kitchen, wearing her red blouse and dark slacks, carrying a cup of tea. At 72, she had maintained her dignity throughout this ordeal, but the prospect of national attention made her pause. "What does that mean for us?" Before Mrs. Chen could answer, Major Marcus Elkins' phone began ringing. The caller ID showed Captain Diana Holloway. "Ma'am, I need to take this." His voice carried the crisp professionalism that had served him well through 3 overseas deployments. "Marcus, I've been fielding calls all morning." Captain Holloway's voice was tight with controlled anger. "CNN, NBC, Fox News, they all want to interview you about what happened to your mother. The Secretary of the Army's office has been briefed. This has become a military family issue, and we're prepared to support you fully." Major Marcus Elkins glanced at his mother, who had moved closer to hear the conversation. "What kind of support are we talking about, Captain?" "Full public affairs backing, legal assistance through JAG if needed, and a clear message that the United States Army stands behind its service members and their families. That racist pig crossed a line when he targeted Mrs. Elkins." The weight of institutional support settling behind them was palpable. Tamara Elkins straightened her shoulders, feeling something shift inside her chest. For decades, she had navigated racist encounters by keeping her head down, staying quiet, avoiding confrontation. But watching her son in his dress blues face down Officer Leonard Beaumont had awakened something dormant within her. "I want to do the interviews," she said quietly. Both Marcus and Mrs. Chen turned to her in surprise. "Mom, you don't have to put yourself through that. I can handle the media." Tamara Elkins shook her head firmly. "Son, you've already done so much. But this is my story too. That man didn't just disrespect you or the uniform. He tried to strip away my humanity. Other mothers need to hear that they don't have to accept that treatment." Within 2 hours, the Elkins living room had been transformed into an impromptu television studio. The CNN crew had arrived first, followed by representatives from 3 other networks. The bright overhead fluorescent lighting, mixed with natural skylight, streaming through the large windows, created the perfect illumination for the cameras. Major Marcus Elkins had changed into his dress blue uniform at the network's request, the ribbons and medals on his chest catching the light. He sat beside his mother on their cream-colored sofa, his bearing impeccable, but his eyes reflecting controlled fury. The CNN correspondent, a professional black woman in a red blazer, leaned forward with genuine empathy. "Mrs. Elkins, can you walk us through what happened when Officer Leonard Beaumont approached your car?" Tamara Elkins took a measured breath, her voice steady and clear. "I was sitting in my son's car, in his neighborhood where I visit regularly, when this officer began screaming at me like I was some kind of criminal. He called me ghetto trash and suggested I was there to case houses for robbery. He made it clear that he saw me as less than human because of the color of my skin." The correspondent's expression tightened. "How did that make you feel?" "Humiliated, angry, but mostly sad that in 2024, a 72-year-old woman can still be treated like a threat for existing while black in a nice neighborhood." Tamara Elkins' voice gained strength with each word. "I've lived through segregation, through decades of subtle and not so subtle racism, but I never expected to be called ghetto trash by someone sworn to protect and serve." Major Marcus Elkins' jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What happened to my mother represents everything wrong with police interactions in minority communities. She wasn't breaking any laws. She was sitting quietly in a car, waiting for me to finish a phone call. Yet Officer Leonard Beaumont immediately saw her as a threat worth humiliating. You're a decorated Army officer with multiple combat deployments. What went through your mind when you saw how your mother was being treated?" "Rage," Major Marcus Elkins admitted with startling honesty. "Then training kicked in. I've led soldiers in combat situations where keeping calm meant the difference between life and death. I knew that losing my temper wouldn't help my mother, but gathering evidence and building a case would." The interview clips began airing within hours, and the public response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with support for the Elkins family and outrage over Officer Leonard Beaumont's behavior. Military veteran organizations issued statements condemning the treatment of Major Marcus Elkins' family. The hashtag Justice for Tamara began trending nationally, but Officer Leonard Beaumont, apparently against all legal advice, decided to tell his side of the story. The local news station that agreed to interview him had set up in a poorly lit room that cast unflattering shadows across his face. Officer Leonard Beaumont wore his short-sleeved police uniform, though he had been placed on administrative leave. His face was flushed, and his voice carried the defensive tone of someone who knew he was losing. "Look, I was doing my job," he insisted to the skeptical-looking reporter. "There had been break-ins in that neighborhood, and I saw a suspicious person sitting in a car. I approached to investigate, which is standard police procedure." "But Officer Leonard Beaumont, we have video of you calling Mrs. Elkins ghetto trash, and you people. How is that standard police procedure?" Officer Leonard Beaumont's face reddened further. "Sometimes you have to use strong language to get compliance from certain types of people. If she had just cooperated instead of giving me attitude, none of this would have escalated." The reporter's eyebrows raised. "Mrs. Elkins appears completely compliant in the video. She never raised her voice or resisted in any way. She had an attitude. "Trust me, I've been doing this for 15 years. I know when someone is being disrespectful." The interview was a disaster for Officer Leonard Beaumont. Every attempt to justify his actions only highlighted the racist assumptions underlying his behavior. Within hours, clips of his defensive, tone-deaf responses were being shared alongside Mrs. Chen's original video, creating a devastating contrast. Attorney Samuel Prescott watched the interview from his office, shaking his head in amazement. He immediately called Major Marcus Elkins. "Did you see Leonard Beaumont's interview? He just gift-wrapped our case. No jury in the country will have sympathy for him after that performance." The police department's situation grew more precarious by the hour. Chief Thomas Gallagher found himself fielding calls from the mayor, city council members, and increasingly frustrated community leaders. Protesters had begun gathering outside the police station, carrying signs reading, "Protect and serve, not humiliate and abuse, and justice for Tamara." Mrs. Dorothy Chen had emerged as an unexpected community organizer, coordinating with other neighbors to support the Elkins family and demand systemic changes in police training. Her own interview with a local station had gone viral, her clear recounting of Officer Leonard Beaumont's behavior providing crucial corroboration. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years, she told the cameras, her voice firm with conviction. "I've seen Officer Leonard Beaumont patrol these streets, and I've watched how differently he treats black residents compared to white ones." What happened to Mrs. Elkins wasn't an isolated incident. It was just the first time someone had the courage to record it. By evening, Captain Diana Holloway had issued a formal statement on behalf of Major Marcus Elkins' military unit. Standing in front of the American flag at their base, she wore her dress uniform with its array of ribbons and spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. "Major Marcus Elkins is one of our finest officers, a decorated combat veteran who has served his country with distinction. The racist treatment his mother received is an insult, not just to their family, but to every service member who fights to protect the values of equality and justice this nation represents." The statement was picked up by military news outlets and veteran organizations across the country. Social media filled with photos of service members expressing solidarity with the Elkins family and condemnation of Officer Leonard Beaumont's actions. As the day ended, Tamara Elkins sat in her son's living room, surrounded by flowers and cards of support that had begun arriving from strangers across the country. The fluorescent lights were off now, leaving only the warm glow of table lamps as she read messages from other elderly black women sharing their own stories of police harassment. "I never imagined my voice could reach this many people," she said to Major Marcus Elkins, who was reviewing legal documents Attorney Samuel Prescott had sent over. "Your voice has always been powerful, Mom. Now the whole country is finally listening." The next morning would bring news of Attorney Samuel Prescott's formal announcement: criminal charges against Officer Leonard Beaumont for civil rights violations, along with a substantial federal lawsuit against both the officer and the police department. But tonight, Tamara Elkins felt something she hadn't experienced in decades: the power of her own voice, amplified by a community that refused to let injustice go unchallenged. Officer Leonard Beaumont's world was crumbling around him, his desperate attempts to control the narrative having backfired spectacularly. The media storm was just the beginning of his reckoning. But for the Elkins family, it marked the moment when victim became victor, when quiet dignity transformed into powerful advocacy for change. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Judge Linda Nakamura's courtroom, casting bright rectangles of light across the polished wooden floors. The overhead fluorescent lights illuminated every corner of the packed chamber, where community members, media representatives, and police officials had gathered for what many considered a watershed moment in local civil rights enforcement. Tamara Elkins sat in the front row, wearing her dignified blue jacket over a cream-colored blouse, her hands folded calmly in her lap, despite the magnitude of the proceedings. Beside her, Major Marcus Elkins cut an imposing figure in his dress blue military uniform, the ribbons and medals on his chest catching the light as he maintained perfect military posture. His green dress shirt was pristine beneath his formal jacket, every detail of his appearance reflecting the discipline and honor that had defined his military career. Attorney Samuel Prescott adjusted his navy blue suit jacket and straightened his emerald green tie as he organized his extensive case files at the plaintiff's table. The evidence he had compiled over the past months painted a damning picture of systematic misconduct and racial bias that could no longer be ignored or dismissed. Across the courtroom, Officer Leonard Beaumont sat hunched at the defendant's table, his usually confident demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. His defense attorney whispered urgent instructions, but Leonard's face had already taken on the pale, defeated expression of a man who knew his career and reputation were about to be obliterated under the weight of overwhelming evidence. Judge Linda Nakamura entered the courtroom with commanding presence, her black robes flowing as she took her position at the bench. The overhead lighting emphasized the stern set of her features as she surveyed the packed courtroom before calling the proceedings to order. This hearing will address multiple charges against Officer Leonard Beaumont, including civil rights violations, misconduct under color of authority, and harassment, Judge Nakamura announced, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. Attorney Prescott, you may present your opening statement. Samuel Prescott rose with measured confidence, his years of civil rights litigation evident in his composed bearing. Your Honor, the evidence will show a pattern of racist behavior that represents not just individual misconduct, but a systematic failure to protect the civil rights of minority citizens. On the afternoon in question, Officer Beaumont's actions toward Mrs. Tamara Elkins were not an aberration, but part of a documented history of racial profiling and abuse of authority. He gestured toward a large screen where Mrs. Dorothy Chen's cell phone recording began playing, the audio crystal clear in the hushed courtroom. Officer Leonard Beaumont's voice filled the chamber, his racist slurs and threatening tone causing visible reactions throughout the gallery. Several community members who had suffered similar treatment nodded grimly as they heard their own experiences reflected in Leonard's aggressive words. The defendant called Mrs. Elkins ghetto trash, questioned her right to exist in her own son's neighborhood, and threatened arrest for the crime of visiting her decorated military officer son. Prescott continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. This was not police work. This was racial intimidation under color of law. The prosecution's case unfolded with devastating precision. Detective James Whitfield took the stand wearing his standard-issue long-sleeved police uniform, his professional demeanor lending credibility to his damning testimony about Leonard's history of complaints and misconduct. In my 15 years with internal affairs, I've rarely seen such a clear pattern of racially motivated behavior. Detective Whitfield testified under Samuel Prescott's questioning. Officer Beaumont has generated 17 complaints from minority citizens over the past 5 years, with consistent allegations of excessive force, racial profiling, and use of derogatory language. Mrs. Dorothy Chen followed, wearing a bright red blouse that seemed to underscore her passionate commitment to justice. Her testimony about witnessing the traffic stop was delivered with the precision of someone who understood the historical importance of bearing witness to injustice. I heard Officer Beaumont call Mrs. Elkins "you people" and "ghetto trash," she testified, her voice clear and unwavering. There was no justification for such language. Mrs. Elkins was cooperative, dignified, and clearly being targeted because of her race. When Major Marcus Elkins took the stand, the courtroom atmosphere shifted palpably. His military bearing commanded immediate respect, and his testimony was delivered with the precision and clarity that had served him throughout his distinguished career. I emerged from my home to find a police officer verbally abusing my mother with racist slurs. Major Elkins testified, his voice controlled, but clearly conveying his outrage. As someone who has served this country for 15 years, including 3 combat deployments, I was appalled to witness such treatment of any citizen, let alone my own mother, in the neighborhood where I pay taxes and serve my community. Samuel Prescott guided Major Elkins through testimony about his military service, creating a stark contrast between his dedication to protecting American values and Officer Leonard Beaumont's violation of those same principles. Major Elkins, how did Officer Beaumont respond when you identified yourself and explained that Mrs. Elkins was your mother visiting your home? Prescott asked. He became defensive and continued to justify his actions, showing no recognition that he had made an error or treated my mother inappropriately. Major Elkins replied. His attitude suggested this was routine behavior for him. The most powerful moment came when Tamara Elkins herself took the stand. She wore her blue jacket with quiet dignity, her gray hair perfectly styled, presenting the image of respectability that made Officer Leonard Beaumont's treatment all the more inexcusable. Mrs. Elkins, Samuel Prescott said gently, please tell the court how Officer Beaumont's words and actions affected you. Tamara's voice was strong despite the emotional weight of her testimony. I have lived 73 years on this earth, raised 5 children, worked as a school administrator for 35 years, and never in my life had anyone speak to me the way that officer did. He called me ghetto trash for visiting my son's home. He made me feel like I didn't belong in America, let alone in my own son's neighborhood. Her words carried through the silent courtroom, and several spectators wiped away tears as she continued. But what hurt most was the realization that this officer felt comfortable treating me that way because he thought I was powerless, that no one would care about one elderly black woman. He was wrong. The defense's case collapsed under the weight of testimony from Officer Leonard Beaumont's own colleagues. Sergeant David Kowalski, wearing his long-sleeved police uniform, provided devastating testimony about Leonard's regular use of racial slurs and his pattern of targeting minority drivers. Officer Beaumont frequently made racist comments during patrol. Sergeant Kowalski testified reluctantly. He would use derogatory terms to describe African American and Hispanic citizens, and he showed a pattern of conducting more traffic stops in minority neighborhoods without legitimate cause. When asked why he hadn't reported this behavior earlier, Kowalski's discomfort was evident. I should have. I failed in my duty to protect the citizens we serve, and I failed Officer Beaumont by not addressing his misconduct before it reached this point. Chief Thomas Gallagher took the stand to announce comprehensive reforms within the department. Wearing his formal long-sleeved uniform with full insignia, he acknowledged the systemic failures that had allowed Officer Leonard Beaumont's behavior to continue unchecked. Effective immediately, Officer Leonard Beaumont has been terminated from the police department, Chief Gallagher announced. Additionally, we are implementing mandatory bias training, body cameras for all officers, and a civilian oversight board with real authority to investigate misconduct complaints. The civil rights lawsuit portion of the proceedings revealed the financial cost of Leonard's actions. The settlement awarded to Tamara Elkins was substantial, but Samuel Prescott emphasized that the monetary compensation was secondary to the policy changes and accountability measures being implemented. This case was never about money, he argued in his closing statement. It was about human dignity, civil rights, and ensuring that no other citizen endures what Mrs. Elkins experienced. Officer Leonard Beaumont's defense attorney made a half-hearted attempt to portray his client's actions as misunderstood police work, but the overwhelming evidence made such arguments appear desperate and tone-deaf. When Leonard himself took the stand, his testimony only reinforced his guilt. His attempts to justify his language and behavior revealed an unrepentant attitude that shocked even his own attorney. I was just doing my job, Leonard insisted, his voice defensive. Suspicious activity is suspicious activity, regardless of someone's race. This statement prompted immediate objection from Samuel Prescott, who pointed out that visiting one's son could never constitute suspicious activity under any legitimate interpretation of police procedure. Judge Linda Nakamura's final ruling was delivered with the gravity befitting a landmark civil rights case. Her voice carried clearly through the packed courtroom as she addressed Officer Leonard Beaumont directly. Officer Beaumont, your actions represent not just individual misconduct, but a betrayal of the oath you took to serve and protect all citizens equally. Your use of racial slurs, your targeting of Mrs. Elkins based on her race, and your abuse of police authority have damaged not only Mrs. Elkins, but the entire community's trust in law enforcement. She continued with increasing intensity. The evidence shows a pattern of behavior that is antithetical to everything we expect from those entrusted with police powers. Your actions were not just unprofessional. They were a violation of Mrs. Elkins' fundamental civil rights and human dignity. Judge Nakamura's ruling upheld all charges against Leonard and endorsed the comprehensive settlement and reform package. This court finds Officer Beaumont guilty on all counts and supports the systemic changes necessary to prevent such violations in the future. As the gavel fell, Tamara Elkins felt a profound sense of vindication wash over her. Major Marcus Elkins placed a protective arm around his mother's shoulders, his military training having served them both well in this different kind of battle for justice. The courtroom erupted in applause from community members who had waited years to see accountability for Leonard's actions. Mrs. Dorothy Chen wiped tears from her eyes, knowing that her decision to record the traffic stop had played a crucial role in achieving justice. Officer Leonard Beaumont left the courtroom in disgrace, his career over and his reputation destroyed by his own actions. The man who had once felt powerful enough to terrorize an elderly woman with racist slurs now faced financial ruin, professional blacklisting, and the permanent stain of being publicly exposed as a civil rights violator. Outside the courthouse, Samuel Prescott addressed the gathered media and community members. Today's ruling sends a clear message that racial profiling and abuse of authority will not be tolerated. Mrs. Elkins' courage in pursuing this case has created lasting change that will protect future generations. Tamara Elkins stood beside her son in the bright afternoon sunlight, her blue jacket a symbol of the dignity she had maintained throughout her ordeal. The formal legal reckoning was complete, but she knew their real victory lay in the systemic changes that would prevent other families from enduring similar injustices. 6 months had passed since that bright afternoon when Officer Leonard Beaumont's racist words shattered the peace of Maple Street. The morning sun now streamed through the windows of the Riverside Community Center, illuminating the faces of 30 police recruits seated in neat rows, their fresh uniforms crisp with hope and uncertainty. At the front of the room stood Tamara Elkins, her blue jacket immaculate, her silver hair styled with the same dignity that had sustained her through her darkest moment. "Good morning, officers," Tamara began, her voice carrying the strength that had emerged from her ordeal. "6 months ago, I was called ghetto trash by a man wearing a uniform just like yours. Today I stand before you not as a victim, but as your teacher." The recruits shifted uncomfortably, some looking down at their notebooks, others meeting her gaze directly. Behind them, Detective James Whitfield observed from his position near the back wall, his green shirt and blue jacket marking him as the new head of the Civil Rights Enforcement Unit, a position created in direct response to the Beaumont case. "The words you speak in uniform carry weight beyond your imagination," Tamara continued, pacing slowly across the front of the room. "When Officer Beaumont looked at me that day, he didn't see a grandmother visiting her decorated war hero son. He saw a stereotype, a threat, something less than human. That choice, those words, they didn't just hurt me, they destroyed his career, cost the city hundreds of thousands of dollars, and shattered trust that's taken months to rebuild. In the third row, a young black recruit named Officer Patricia Williams raised her hand. "Mrs. Elkins, how do we make sure we never become like him?" Tamara paused, her expression softening. "By remembering that every person you encounter is someone's mother, someone's child, someone's hero. By questioning your assumptions before they become actions. By understanding that your badge gives you authority, but it doesn't make you superior to the people you serve." The training session was part of a comprehensive reform program that had transformed the Riverside Police Department. Chief Thomas Gallagher, who had survived the scandal by implementing sweeping changes, now required all officers to complete monthly bias training and community engagement sessions. The reforms had become a model studied by departments across the nation. After the session ended, Tamara walked to her car, the same vehicle that had been parked innocuously in her son's driveway when her nightmare began. As she drove through the familiar streets of Marcus's neighborhood, she noticed the changes that 6 months had brought. New community policing substations had been established. Officers now walked regular beats to build relationships with residents, and the hostile us versus them mentality that had enabled Beaumont's behavior was slowly being replaced with genuine partnership. She pulled into Marcus's driveway, where her son was tending to his front garden, still wearing his military uniform from his morning meeting at the Pentagon. Major Marcus Elkins had been promoted to lieutenant colonel, his handling of his mother's case having demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership the Army valued. His new role included serving as a liaison between military and civilian law enforcement agencies, helping to develop best practices for community relations. "How was the training session, Mama?" Marcus asked, straightening up from the tomato plants he'd been watering. "Powerful," Tamara replied, adjusting her blue jacket as a warm breeze stirred the afternoon air. "I could see it in their eyes, Marcus. Real understanding, not just politeness or political correctness, but genuine comprehension of how their actions affect people's lives." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You know, all those years deployed overseas, I thought I was fighting for freedom and justice in foreign lands. But watching you transform pain into purpose, seeing you educate the very system that tried to dehumanize you, that's the most powerful battle I've ever witnessed." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Mrs. Dorothy Chen, who had become something of a local celebrity since her recording of Beaumont's behavior went viral. She wore a red blouse and carried a small plaque, her face beaming with pride. "Tamara, Marcus, I had to show you this," Dorothy exclaimed, holding up the award. "The City Council just named me Citizen of the Year for community service and civil rights advocacy." Marcus examined the plaque, reading aloud. "In recognition of Dorothy Chen's courage in documenting injustice and her tireless work in building bridges between law enforcement and the community, you deserve every word of that recognition," Tamara said warmly. "Your quick thinking and brave actions that day made all the difference." Dorothy's expression grew serious. "I just did what anyone should do when they witness injustice. But I've learned so much from watching you, Tamara. The way you turned that horrible experience into something that's helping thousands of people, that takes a special kind of strength." The three friends stood together in the afternoon sunlight, each changed by the events that had brought them together. The neighborhood around them buzzed with quiet activity, children playing, neighbors chatting over fences, and notably, a police officer walking his beat, stopping to talk with residents who actually seemed glad to see him. "Whatever happened to Beaumont?" Dorothy asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Marcus's expression hardened slightly. "Last I heard, he's working security at a mall in another state, lost his pension, can't get hired by any law enforcement agency, and he's facing ongoing civil suits from other victims who found the courage to come forward after Mama's story went public." "Good," Dorothy said firmly. "Some people might call that harsh, but actions have consequences. He spent years terrorizing people who looked like Tamara. People who didn't have a decorated war hero for a son, or neighbors willing to stand up and be witnesses, as if summoned by their conversation. Detective James Whitfield's patrol car pulled up to the curb. He stepped out, his muscular frame filling out his uniform shirt, and walked toward them with a smile. "Mrs. Elkins, I wanted to update you on the Civil Rights Unit's progress," he said, extending his hand to shake hers. "We've reviewed over 200 cases from the past 5 years, identified patterns of bias that were previously ignored, and we've already prevented a dozen situations that could have escalated like the Beaumont incident." Tamara's eyes lit up. "That's wonderful news, Detective. Knowing that other families won't have to go through what we experienced, that makes everything worthwhile." James nodded respectfully. "Your willingness to share your story, to keep speaking at our training sessions, even when it means reliving painful memories, it's making a real difference. Officers are changing their behavior because they can see the human impact of their words and actions." As the detective returned to his car to continue his rounds, Tamara felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The scared, humiliated woman who had sat in her car 6 months ago, being verbally assaulted by a racist officer, had found not just justice but purpose. Her voice, once silenced by shock and fear, now carried across auditoriums and training centers, educating and inspiring. Marcus watched his mother with undisguised admiration. "You know what I'm most proud of, Mama?" "What's that, son?" "You could have taken the settlement money and moved somewhere quiet, tried to forget this whole experience. Instead, you decided to make sure no other grandmother would have to endure what you went through. That's the definition of heroism." Tamara smiled, remembering the scared woman she had been just months before. "Your father always told me that our character isn't defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond to what happens to us." That day with Beaumont, I felt powerless, voiceless, invisible. Today I know that my voice matters, my story matters, and my pain can become someone else's protection. The sun began to set over the neighborhood, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Families gathered on porches, children rode bicycles along sidewalks, and the community that had rallied around the Elkins family continued to thrive. The transformation was visible everywhere, in the respectful interactions between police and residents, in the diversity training programs that had become mandatory throughout the city, and in the faces of young officers who now understood that their badges came with responsibilities that extended far beyond law enforcement. As Tamara prepared to drive home, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 6 months ago, she had been a victim of systemic racism and individual cruelty. Today, she was an advocate, an educator, and a voice for those who couldn't speak for themselves. The scared woman who had been called ghetto trash had become a powerful force for justice and change. Marcus walked his mother to her car, as he had done countless times since that traumatic day. But now the gesture carried different meaning. It wasn't about protection from future harm, but about the continued bond between two people who had faced injustice together and emerged stronger. "Drive safely, Mama," Marcus said, hugging her tightly. "Always do, son." "And Marcus?" "Yes, thank you for showing me that sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight right here at home." As Tamara drove through the streets of the neighborhood where her ordeal had begun, she felt no fear, no anxiety about being stopped or questioned. She belonged here, not because of her son's achievements or her newfound status as a civil rights advocate, but because she was a human being deserving of respect and dignity. That fundamental truth, which Officer Leonard Beaumont had tried to deny, now shone as bright as the evening stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Her journey from victim to victor was complete, but her work was far from over. Tomorrow would bring another training session, another opportunity to look into the eyes of young officers and help them understand that every person they encounter deserves to be treated with humanity and respect. Her dignity had been restored not through revenge, but through the transformative power of turning pain into purpose and injustice into advocacy. The Elkins family had not just won their case, they had changed their community and helped heal a broken system. In a world where such victories often seem impossible, their story stood as proof that courage, dignity, and determination could still triumph over hatred and ignorance. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.